Jennifer Dukes-Lee, welcome back to For Real. You're an alum.
I am. I feel just overwhelmed by the fact that you'll have me again. I mean, you're such a great interviewer, such a great podcast.
Oh, you are so kind.
Sweet.
You are so kind. The only other person who has been on twice is my mother.
Oh.
And there is a certain, we share holidays. So I have to be a little bit more cautious with my question asking with her. I'm going to let it all hang out with you. And I'm so glad you were willing to do it again. Thank you for making the time to be with us.
This is so fun.
Well, listen, one of the reasons you're an alum, in addition to just being a really fantastic person, is that you wrote another book. That's pretty impressive. You said it was 2021 that you wrote Growing Slow, which is one of my very faves. That was published in 2021. I guess it's 2023, but still, that's kind of a breakneck speed. Would you like a nap instead of a podcast interview?
I would.
You would?
I would. Although I got to tell you, this was the most fun thing to write ever.
Okay.
Like of anything I've ever written.
Oh, tell me about that.
Oh my goodness.
Because you've written a ton in lots of different spaces.
I have written a ton. I've written a lot of newspaper articles, magazine articles, books, blog posts. Oh my goodness. I mean, gazillions of things. This was so fun. Well, first of all, it's a lot easier to write a journal than it is a trade book because...
Okay, and I need to pause. See, I'm not a good interviewer because I didn't even say the name. The name of the new book, listeners, Stuff I'd Only Tell God. The subtitle is A Guided Journal of Courageous Honesty, Obsessive Truth-Telling, and Beautifully Ruthless Self-Discovery. So it's a guided journal, a different lane than you've been in. So please continue.
It is. And so although it also fits what I've been doing like all my life, which I can explain in a way, but most books, every book that I've ever written is, it's like chapters, like a bunch of words on pages. And then there's these stories that all tie together and lead the reader on a journey toward some spiritual end, some spiritual goal. And in this sense, I have the same goal as the end piece, but it's less about me and entirely about you or whoever is going through the journal. So it is hundreds, probably thousands of questions that take you step by step through the people in your life that have influenced you for good or bad, through your past, your present, your future, hopes, dreams, worries, fears, and then just weird, quirky stuff that makes you, which is super fun. I had a blast writing that section, but I've always asked questions. It's been my nature, whether we're at a dinner party together or if we are in a Bible study together, or when I was a news reporter, I made a career out of it. And so I've taken my favorite questions. Some of them are just really weird, honestly. But some of them are really deep. And then I put them all together so that you could have this sort of journal of self-discovery. And it's been fun. I mean, it was great to write it, but it's also been really helpful for me to go through it. Like, I take my journal and I write down the answers. And oftentimes I've been talking about the answers on social media. So it's been really, really good for me.
Fascinating. Okay, I want to back up even one more step. Why? Why this book? Because you have a very established voice in the trade paperback world. You are an editor at Bethany House. You are with words all the time and lots of different versions of how we tell different stories. Why this book and why now? Why the pivot?
Yeah, I think that we can learn so much about ourselves by being willing to ask good questions. Asking God really tough questions is actually how I came to faith.
Okay.
I grew up in the church. Mom and dad did all the right things. And when I got to college, well, really, when I was still in high school, I was like, I don't know if I believe any of this stuff. Right. It just doesn't make intellectual sense to me. And I really strayed away from the way that my parents raised me. And I didn't know how to find my way back. and I kept it very, very secret. I did not ask myself questions. I did not ask God questions. I just kind of boxed it up and just didn't deal with it. But when I started asking questions, and when I encountered Jesus in the Bible, like people asking him questions all the time, and he himself asking people questions all the time, like, do you want to get well? Like I was finding myself transformed by the answers and by the questions.
Yeah.
I completely gravitated toward Thomas. He was, I knew him growing up as Doubting Thomas, which seemed like a shameful thing to doubt or question. But when I looked at how Jesus responded to his questions with really good answers, I'm like, Jesus is not freaked out about any question that I have. And it was super freeing for me. And in the study notes of my Bible, where Thomas is asking Jesus some tough questions, in the study notes, it says, silent doubts rarely find answers. And I underline that. It practically feels like scripture to me. And I don't mean to be sacrilegious here, but it feels deeply important, that sentence to me. And so this journal, then, it's not just for people who, didn't believe or are going through some spiritual crisis. It's a journal that helps you grow as a human. There are deeply spiritual questions in there as well. There's even a whole section of questions that Jesus asks people, and you have an opportunity to answer them. But I feel deeply that there's a lot of beauty that happens right after a question mark, if you're willing to answer, if you're willing to be honest.
Oh, that is fantastic and so refreshing. I feel like my parents also did all the right things. Lots of folks in my life did, but somewhere I picked up that same idea that if I was going to ask questions, I better be careful. I don't know where I got this, because my mom was actually very vocal in saying there is no question that can scare God. And she wouldn't freak out when I would ask some real doozies. And that was such a gift to me. And I'm trying to do that with my kids too. There's nothing you can ask that will make him start to really tremble. Oh no, I haven't thought of that. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned Thomas. We just talked about him yesterday in church, and you're right. He asked these wonderful questions. I've always thought he had a bad rap. Doubting Thomas, he was just asking the obvious, like, the guy died. I don't believe he is not dead. I saw it, right? I feel like that's pretty logical. That's
reasonable.
That's very reasonable. And I think probably that's what I love the most about Stuff I'd Only Tell God. I love that you are not fearful. These are not fearful questions. And they're also not siloed. By that, I mean, you cover the whole person. You talk about past, present, future. You talk about people in our lives, experiences, even places in our lives. And I think only good things can come from that. I want to return to that in just a second, but I wonder how you journal in your real life. This isn't a blank journal, right? So most of my journaling experience has been open up a fresh page and start writing. It's not silly. And it's also not stuffy. You seem to kind of thread that needle, that it's both wise and tender and funny and quirky. You call it a reader's own little confession booth, which I really love. That's a great hook. You must have a great marketing team. Or maybe that was yours. I love it so much. So I'm wondering, how do you journal in your real life? Is this it?
So I have journaled ever since I had in fourth grade my Pac-Man book of secrets.
Pac-Man.
My diary. Yes.
And did you name it the Book of Secrets?
No, it was the name of it. It was the name.
The dark side.
I loved Pac-Man. I know. I loved Pac-Man. I still love Ms. Pac-Man, by the way.
Yeah.
Just a segue, but I just really do like that a lot, that game. I am willing to put my quarters in if I see it somewhere. But my Pac-Man Book of Secrets, I wrote down, and it was just like, this is the stuff that happened. Yeah. It wasn't like, earth-shattering big stuff. But when I look back on it now, I can see this person developing and her interests, and like those things were important to her. And then as I got older, my journals became more like I'd have a variety of journals as an adult. Like I've had prayer journals, I've had scripture journals, I've had scripture drawing journals, and I'm not very good at drawing. I've had gratitude journals. I've had journals where I just kind of record random little thoughts and ideas and concerns. I have journals where I should write about this later on my blog, like a whole blog list journal. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my journaling, honestly, is done online. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of an open book. So people who follow me on Facebook and Instagram know that I write in the moment, unless it's something that God's still working out in me. Yeah. But I tend to write in the moment. I don't plan out some big thing that I'm going to do. I sit down and journal and write. There's some things that obviously don't make it onto that aren't for public consumption, but a lot of it is. But I think the problem for a lot of people is they'll say things like, I'm not a writer. I don't know what to write. I don't know what to say. And so they miss out on the benefit of self-discovery because they just look at a blank page and it's overwhelming. That's overwhelming for me as a writer. So if it's overwhelming for me, who does this for a profession, how much more for somebody who just feels like I can't do it. And so I started to think about how when I talk to people, they tend to tell me things. It's just a gift that I have. And it's also super annoying. I can seem maybe very nosy right away. I just start to ask questions that maybe aren't any of my business. But I enjoy that process because I care about people and I'm curious. And it's interesting to me to see what happens when people answer questions. And so I thought, what would it be like to create a journal of those kinds of questions that give people a space to where they don't have to tell me their answer, but they can just keep it to themselves, or maybe that they would share later on down the road.
Talk to me about why that's important. I mean, we live in a culture where there's a lot of confession. Some of it is real kind of posturing, right? There are a lot of kind of maybe faux confessionals I'm thinking about on social media. And for example, my biggest fault is that I just work way too hard. And I'm like, yeah, that's probably not your biggest fault. But you know what I'm saying? I think there is a cultural acceptance to saying things out loud. But what do you feel is the point? What do we get out of being honest with ourselves and honest with God?
There are so many benefits. One, I'm going to share a story from this morning, for instance. The question that I answered in Stuff I'd Only Tell God this morning is, if I only had 2 weeks left to live, what would I do? And I began to write down the things that I would do. I would go on one more date with the love of my life. I would remind myself of what God has to say about me and have that comfort me, because I think I'd be scared if I knew I only had 2 weeks. I would want to make sure that the girls knew without a doubt that God was still good, even though Mom was not going to be here anymore, and that we would see each other again someday. And oh my goodness, I'm about to cry. Ooh, this is why journaling is good. This right here, the way that I'm feeling right now on the verge of tears, is why journaling is good. I would climb one more mountain or drive up one more mountain, probably. I would put my feet in the sea one more time. And I wrote all those things down. And the immediate impact was, I have time. I can do those things. And it just was a sacred moment for me, just by answering one question. And so that's why it's worth it. We can get so busy with just the day in, day out, putting one foot in front of the other. That sort of introspection helps you decide what's most important of all. And that's just one question. That's all I had time or capacity for today, but it was enough. It was enough for me to think about how I want to be, even in just the next 2 weeks. I can't do all those things in the next 2 weeks, but I can, it revealed to me what my priorities are. And so that I can order my life a little bit more around them. Another reason that journaling is so important is because it really does help you to declutter your mind. There's a lot going up in these noggins that we just need to kind of unload and put down on paper. And our brains are just constantly bombarded with opinions and demands and information and responsibilities and so much more. And a journal like this helps you to clear out like distressing thoughts and worries and really move forward with renewed peace. I know that even when I do like a brain dump at the end of a day, if I just come into the office real quick and write down everything that I need to get done in the next day, I automatically have a renewed sense of peace, and I can go to bed without ruminating on all of that. Right. So it has that decluttering capability. It has a healing capability. It helps you to prioritize, just like I mentioned in the example of what would you do with two weeks left. So there's just so many different benefits. And one of the biggest things I think for me as a believer is God meets me on the pages of my journals. Like, when I dust off the brain and just lay this all out before him and say, God, this is what's on my mind. These are my beliefs about things. These are my fears about things. I am trusting. I'm saying, God, I trust that you can handle whatever I'm throwing at you today. And that has been a tremendous benefit of journaling for me.
I really appreciate the thoughtfulness of that answer, because here's my confession. I'm a contrarian, Jennifer, and I'm the type of person who does not answer reflective questions in Bible studies. I don't like people bossing me around. You can ask my mom. I'm pretty sure she would agree with that summary of me. Your book, though, is different. It feels invitational to me. It doesn't feel bossy. It doesn't feel like I'm supposed to check a box and then continue onward, although I am a box checker. I like it. But I like the way that you come alongside me. I haven't figured out, I don't know how to articulate why that is, but maybe it's because I know you, but I don't think so. No. I think it's the way that you speak and the way that you invite me onto the page. It's just enough. Every prompt is just enough. I don't feel like I feel like I can dig as far as I want and that there will be good things there, but you ask fantastic questions. So I'm just saying, well done, because usually I give the side eye to people bossing me around with questions. Well done.
Well, that means a lot. That is so affirming for me as this Bible, or as this journal starts to make its way out into the world. So here's the thing. I am almost invisible in it. I think that's why.
Okay.
I almost didn't have an introduction in there. I almost didn't say anything about who I was. I almost didn't even want my name on it. I wanted it to feel completely your journey. Because, there are books where you lose yourself in them, and then there's books where you find yourself. And this is a find yourself one. And I didn't want to stand in the way of that. So I have a very brief, like 1,000 word, maybe less introduction that basically says, hey, here I am. And then from there on out, I back out. Mm-hmm. I don't even use the word you in there. Mm-hmm. It's all I. Mm-hmm. So it's you as the reader taking ownership, because you'll be like, if I only have 2 weeks to live. Well, Jennifer's not even in the room. Like that's just you and God then. So that was very, very intentional. Mm-hmm. And there's also no judgments made on anything. So there's places in there like, I hope I don't end up living by this person in heaven. Like, just put it down. Like, just say it.
I got a couple on that list.
Right. Or like, these are Bible verses that scare me.
Right.
Or this is something that I believe about God that I didn't used to, or this is something that I don't believe about God anymore. Like, and there's no judgment. There's nothing after that says, oh, but Kim, don't you realize?
Yes.
There's nothing. There is zero judgment. You get to come at this as honest as you've ever been.
Okay. I want to talk about that, because even the book, even the title, Stuff I'd Only Tell God, I feel like I am getting older, 47. And I'm just now, after walking with Jesus for lots of time, I feel like I am just now in a new way becoming more honest with God. Sometimes I really had for whole seasons of my life. I mean, I'm writing a book about this now, so that's probably why it's so rough. But for whole seasons of my life, I have felt like the place to be honest is with me, maybe trying as well as I can. But then when I'm talking to God, I got to clean it up a little bit. Right. Or I need to kind of show that I really, I know you've said this, and so I'm in line. This book is a beautiful, fresh bit of fresh air. And I feel like I just personally right now in this point in my life am learning the value of ruthless honesty with God before I've processed, before I've decided, before I have remembered what's true. I'm trying to move in. Here's what this looks like. When I go on walks, often I am praying out loud. People think I'm talking to somebody in my earbuds, but I'm not. And they don't need to know that. So out loud, instead of doing my preamble that I've done for years, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for who you are, what you're doing, all these things that I've said, I'm cutting that. And I'm going straight to God. I'm so stressed out about blank. My blank child needs help and I don't know what to do. In other words, I'm pretending like I'm walking with my friend, which is what I'm doing. But you know what I'm saying? I'm pretending I'm walking with you. And instead of, I would never say to you as my friend, you know what, Jennifer, I really appreciate the way that you have, and just like give you a beautiful speech about how you've lived, what I've learned. That's not how we talk. We say, you're asking me how I am. I'm going to tell you. So tell me about that. The honesty with God. Have you always known this? Is this something you're learning? Even the title, I think, is provocative in the best way.
Yeah, that is so good. I just feel like that's eye-opening right there. What you said about walking with a friend, that is so good, Kim. I will tell you that honesty with God has not been my default position. So, there was some years ago where we went to a spiritual retreat and we were given little pieces of paper that we would write like sins or just things on that were really burdening us and maybe separating, like an obstacle between us and God. And I was so dishonest with God that I made things as initials. Nobody was going to see it because they were going to burn the thing later. But I made like little initials, like maybe like, that's so stupid. I mean, I'm like an adult woman. Like,
no, I identify with that fully. Like I'm protecting him or something.
Yeah. Like, I don't know if you can see this word, I mean, yeah. So that's been difficult for me. I think there's just been a lot of shame about the things that we carry and a lot of hiding and pretending and, just the same way like Adam and Eve, like, oh, better hide behind the bushes now. We've been busted here. And just feeling like that nakedness before the Lord feels super scary. It just does. And I feel like I'm learning
do that to me. I mean, I don't know where I'm picking that up. When I'm finally honest with him, it's not like he makes me feel like, wow, that's a lot. I'm going to have to process that and get back to you. Not at all. It's my own stuff. I don't even know if I'm thinking he can't handle it. It must be more that I can't. That I feel like I'm really, I need to make the plate spin and then he will watch. I mean, it's just, I don't know where I'm getting this. I'm glad you don't. I'm glad this book doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, I feel that this is this journey, even just creating the journal and having to answer the questions myself has been peeling away layers of this kind of protection that I've put between me and God that is it's prevented a level of intimacy with him that I don't want to give away any more of that ground. Oh. I want to, just keep peeling off the layers, and allowing myself to be held and loved by him and to walk with him as a friend. I love that image.
I love your words in the beginning. You put words to this. You say that as we write, may we have this combo, ruthless honesty and generous compassion. And I think I have not done that, particularly in my prayer life, right? But I really try to do that with my kids. I'm not as good with me, right? If my kids come to me and tell me something alarming, man, I love their honesty. And I have just loads in general. I hope I have loads of compassion for them. I'm not as good with myself for that. So talk to us about how we do that. Like if someone hears that call, be ruthlessly honest and generously compassionate with yourself as you're writing in this journal or you're approaching some of these questions. If our listeners are thinking, well, how in the world I want to do that? How do I do that?
Well, the journal does take you on kind of an orderly path. Although if you're not linear, you can skip around, or if you just can't handle a question, just skip over it and come back. But when you start with your people, because more than anything, that's how you've been influenced. I mean, yeah, there's some like DNA stuff and all that, but like who's been in your life has deeply impacted your life. So you spend a lot of time with that. You spend a lot of time like thinking about who's really hurt me and who have I hurt and who's given me the best advice I've ever gotten and who am I having trouble forgiving? And that level of honesty, it does create compassion for yourself because, you know, when I'm writing about a kindergarten teacher who was just super unkind to me, or a 7th grade girl that was rude, or that maybe I was the rude one, like I begin to understand who I am today as a result. And I'm able to process and deal with that. And the same is true when I go through the me and my past section. When I look back at what I've gone through in my life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I treat myself with more compassion and see, instead of like pushing this person aside or, you know, shaming her, I embrace that past me and speak to her with kindness and compassion. There's even a section in there where you write a letter to your younger self. And that's been a helpful practice for early readers, beta readers that have been going through it, to just, you know, what would you say to your 10 years ago self or your 20 years ago self? And most people come away from that practice not writing things like, why did you have to be such a jerk back then?
Right.
Or, wow, I don't like you. It's usually things like, don't worry so much about this. It all turns out. And you begin to look at that previous version of yourself and realize she helped me get to where I am today. For the poor choices, but like the really brave things that she did. And that helps you treat yourself with more compassion too.
So that's why it's a duo. I don't know that you can have that kind of compassion without the honesty. You have to look at the whole darn thing, whether you want to or not. I think it's just so wise. I have a question about specifically a little bit more practical question, how to consume this. So how do we, and I, you know, I don't mean to put all of the pressure of this conversation on this fantastic book, but I think even if listeners don't run out and buy a copy, though you should run out and buy a copy, the advice is sound, to have compassion and generosity of spirit towards yourself, and to take a look and to slow down. See, there's a theme here in your work. Theme of slowing down and taking a good look about where we are before years are gone and we've never slowed to a walking pace. So if we're going to do that, how specifically with this journal do you envision people doing? You mentioned today that you took one question and that was it. Is that kind of how you envisioned the book itself and the journaling process itself, even if we're not going to use your book, just one bite at a time?
I think so. It really depends on how much time people have. I think the most important thing is just committing to honesty from the get-go.
Okay.
And committing to being generous and compassionate toward yourself from the get-go. And then you can kind of what I call choose your adventure. So the journal is put together in a particular order, starting with your people, and then it goes to your past, your present, your future. And then there's this section in the middle called As Honest as I've Ever Been, which are that's the deep dive stuff.
The zingers. Yeah.
And there's a section in there called Me and My Weird Ways, which maybe you just need a day of lightness. And so you just go fill out 2 or 3 questions in that section. But if you want to start at the beginning and move your way through, that's probably a really good way to do it. But I just don't want to like give people a bunch of rules on this thing because people are going to approach it really differently. I'll be very curious as it goes along to hear how people do encounter it, because I tried to create something with different personalities in mind and really tried to back away from giving too much instruction. But yet there are some people that I'm already like, how do I use this thing? And do I start at the beginning? Right. And what if I can't answer that question? And how many minutes? So it's just the same like with a Bible reading plan. Some people will read a Bible in a year and consume great amounts of scripture in one day as a result of that. Others take their time and spend a week on one set of passages. Right. So there really aren't rules about it. I think that as you get into it, you'll find the rhythm that works for you. My rhythm is like I try a page a day, but for instance, this one question that I did today is at the bottom of a page of maybe like 6 other prompts. But I just answered that one question.
Yeah. Okay, that's super helpful. Jennifer, since last time we talked, your sweet dad went home to Jesus. And I read every bit that you wrote about him. I watched you walk through that whole goodbye process, the right after goodbye process. And you still write about him sometimes. And first, I want to tell you, I'm just so sorry because that was hard. No matter where he is now, and we know, and no matter where you are, you're not together. And so I'm just so sorry. Some of your posts made me just weep. And I love my dad the way you love your dad. And so I'm sure that's part of it. They're both Northwest Iowa guys. I'm sure that's part of it too. But I'm wondering how grief is for you and how you are walking in it and through it. That's a big question. You can do whatever you want with it.
Absolutely. Well, I believe it was Ann Voskamp who I first heard this from. And it's that as writers, we live life twice. One as in the reality of it, and then the second in the retelling of it. So that can feel super painful. It sounds really painful to do. And that does mean that I end up having double the tears. Because when you remember those things and write about those things, you cry again. There's just no way around it. But that is the power of writing it down. I mean, I just don't know how to go through this life without processing it on paper, or, whether that's a journal or a Facebook post or whatever. I talk about Dad a lot in my keynote addresses at conferences, and I don't know any other way to do it. I'm not a very private processor, for better or worse. My grief has been a very public thing. There's been, points of anguish, obviously, that aren't out there for everybody to see. But I don't want to say I use the grief to bless other people. That just it just commodifies it somehow. And I don't know how to describe it. But there is something that brings me great encouragement and a deep joy knowing that our story helps others in the midst of their own. When people say things to me like, you put into words the way I feel about my own dad, or you've helped me today with grief in this particular situation. So that is that public way of grieving has just been how I've processed a lot of this. I spoke at my dad's funeral. It's just decided I don't care if I cry and, make a messing myself up front. It's just that is a part of how God made me. That's not right for everybody. Mm-hmm. So to somebody that might just sound completely frightening and appalling, but it's been very, very healing for me. We just had Anna, our second oldest daughter, was baptized yesterday by immersion. I got to baptize her. That was pretty cool. Awesome. But in the moments before we went up and into that tank, I thought, my dad's not here. It's just there. It just comes in waves, and that I'll think that, I'm coming along. I'm progressing in my grief, but it doesn't work like that. Your heart just learns how to move forward without this person there. And, I'll smell Stetson in a grocery store aisle, or I'll run by a Dairy Queen, and those things will make me cry out of nowhere. It just comes in waves.
Well, you're wise to let the wave hit. I don't know that we have always done a good job of that. I heard a rabbi talk about that one time. He actually wrote a book. I'd have to think about this. The person who helps me with show notes is going to not be super happy that I say a rabbi and then have no citation, but we'll find one for you, listeners. He wrote a book in reaction to his own father's death, after having helped other people go through death and burial and the entire process many times as a spiritual leader, as a rabbi in his congregation. And then his own experience with grief, how that made him want to apologize to all the people that he had mentored or had kind of just guided through that, because he said, I had no idea. I didn't know. And one of the things he said was, I think I had thought that grief was more linear than it was, and also a little less wild than it is. He said, and this particular rabbi lived by the ocean. He said, when I stand by the ocean, in the ocean, if a wave is coming, it doesn't matter how resolved I am to stand in the wave. My job is actually to sit down and let the wave carry me. There is nothing I can do to tame it. I need to let the wave pass. And then when it's done, I stand up again. And I have thought of that metaphor so many times in my own grief. And you just mentioned it beautifully too. Instead of deciding I've got to control this, or I shouldn't be feeling this anymore. DQ shouldn't make me upset. That's a pile of hooey. I'm so glad that you don't believe that, but also you're showing your daughters too, that when the wave hits, you just sit down. You're going to be okay, but don't fight that. That doesn't get anyone anywhere. So you've done that in your writing too. I so appreciate it. I am with the legions of people who have said to you, you've put words to my own heart and to my own thoughts. You do that on the daily. I'm so appreciative of it.
That means a lot. And I'm going to carry that wave image with me. It is what it feels like.
Yeah.
And I think that culturally we're educated, or I don't know what the right word is, but it's modeled to us that you try to figure out how to, stand up against the wave and
yes,
put, just be firm. And it's impossible.
No.
And it's tiring. And there is something, like when you're in an ocean and where you just ride the wave and you realize that in an ocean, like you're actually buoyed. It doesn't like overtake you. You are, when you give yourself into it, it's, you become part of the ocean, and it's a much more beautiful way of moving forward in life, for sure.
Well, thank you for showing us your heart so beautifully, Jennifer, in your posts, in your books, in your new book, Stuff I'd Only Tell God. I appreciate that you, it's not just that you're thoughtful about what you're writing, you're also just the person I want to live next door to. And I think that is and I have really great neighbors. For my neighbors listening, I'm not trying to boot you out. However, you have this wonderful gift of inviting the reader to trust you and to hang out with you. And I just so appreciate that. I'm so grateful for that, and love this new book. I, the contrarian who does not like bossy pants and prefers to be bossy pants, am making my way through Stuff I'd Only Tell God. And I feel like that is a victory. So well done. You won.
I love it.
I'll report back.
I would love to hear. I'd love to see your answers. Well, ones that you
would. Okay.
Ones that you'd be willing to share.
Good caveat. Good, Kara. That made me have a hive when you said that.
Like, would you survive a zombie apocalypse? I'm dying to know.
Oh, 100% I would not. There's no way.
Are you serious?
Oh, no. I'm very quick to just decide time to go home to Jesus. I'm serious. We talk about this in our house. My husband is a total survival person. I always say, if something really horrible happens, if you're not within about 15 feet of me, I'm throwing up my hands and just eating a bonbon and deciding it was a good run. I'm not kidding. I have no resolve. I'm just like, sounds like it's too hard. I know where I'm headed. Isn't that horrible? My children always look at me like, oh my gosh, we need to make sure we're with dad if anything really bad happens.
Oh my goodness. That's hilarious.
A no to the zombies. Next question. Okay.
Well, yes.
Okay, Jennifer Dukes-Lee, thank you. God bless you. I'm so grateful for this time with you. I hope this book flies off the shelves. Not just because I think we want a vote in your direction, but also because I think it's going to do so many good things for our hearts. So thank you for the time you took in writing it and for the honesty you used all along the way.
Thank you. Appreciate you.